A red and blue flash cut through the darkness of the quiet highway. The police sirens screamed behind the old pickup truck as it rolled slowly to the side of the road. Gravel crunched under the tires as the truck stopped. The driver inside kept both hands on the steering wheel, calm but tense. Inside the police cruiser, Officer Rick Dalton stared forward with a cold expression. His jaw tightened as he looked at the man in the truck ahead. "Another one?" he muttered under his breath. Rick Dalton had been a police officer in Pinewood County for nearly 10 years. To the outside world, he was known as a hard-working cop who kept drugs and crime off the streets. But inside the black neighborhoods of Pinewood, his name carried a different meaning. Fear. Too many men had been pulled over by Dalton. Too many of them had ended up in jail. And too many of those arrests had never made sense. Dalton stepped out of his cruiser and slowly walked toward the pickup truck. The flashing lights painted the road in harsh red and blue. He tapped the driver's window. The man inside lowered it calmly. "Evening, officer," he said. The driver was a black man in his early 30s, wearing a plain jacket and work boots. His face looked calm, but his eyes were sharp. Dalton shined his flashlight into the truck. "License and registration." The man handed them over without hesitation. Dalton glanced at the license. "Marcus Carter." He looked at Marcus again. "You know why I pulled you over?" Marcus shook his head. "No, sir." Dalton smirked slightly. "You were swerving." Marcus frowned slightly. "I don't believe I was." Dalton leaned closer. "Are you arguing with me?" Marcus stayed calm. "No, officer." Dalton straightened and slowly walked around the truck, shining his light through the windows. "What's in the back?" "Just tools." Dalton opened the truck bed and looked inside. A toolbox, some ropes, a spare tire. Nothing unusual, but Dalton's mind had already made its decision. He walked back to Marcus's window. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus obeyed quietly. Dalton placed him against the truck and began searching his pockets. Then Dalton suddenly reached into the truck's center console. A small plastic bag appeared in his hand. White powder inside. Dalton held it up. "Well, look at that," he said. Marcus's eyes widened. "That's not mine." Dalton smiled coldly. "Sure it isn't." Within minutes, Marcus Carter was sitting in the back of the police cruiser with handcuffs around his wrists. The charges would be possession and intent to distribute, a serious crime. As the cruiser drove away, Marcus stared through the window at the dark road behind him. He knew exactly what had just happened, and he knew he had no way to prove it. The next morning, Pinewood County buzzed with quiet rumors. Another arrest. Another black man taken in by Officer Dalton. Inside the small county jail, Marcus sat in a holding cell staring at the concrete wall. Hours passed. Then a guard walked up to the bars. "You've got a visitor?" Marcus looked surprised. In the small meeting room sat a woman in a gray suit with a stack of files. She stood when Marcus entered. "Marcus Carter?" "Yes," she extended her hand. "My name is Rachel Carter." Marcus shook her hand cautiously. "I'm your attorney." Marcus frowned slightly. "I didn't hire a lawyer." Rachel smiled slightly. "No, but someone asked me to take the case." Marcus sat down slowly. Rachel opened a folder. "Let's just say someone very interested in Officer Rick Dalton." Marcus leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Rachel looked him directly in the eyes. "It means you're not the only person he's done this to." Meanwhile, across town, Rick Dalton sat in the police station filling out paperwork. His report described the arrest in neat official language: traffic stop, suspicious behavior, illegal substances discovered during search, case closed. But someone else in the station had been watching him closely. Detective Aaron Blake stood near the hallway reading the report. Aaron had recently transferred from a federal investigative task force, and something about Dalton's cases had already caught his attention. Too many arrests, too many weak pieces of evidence, too many suspects who looked exactly the same. Aaron walked into Dalton's office. "Busy night." Dalton looked up. "Just doing my job." Aaron nodded slowly. "Marcus Carter." Dalton shrugged. "Caught him with drugs." Aaron studied him carefully. "Body cam footage available." Dalton hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Battery died halfway through." Aaron smiled faintly. "Convenient." Dalton leaned back in his chair. "You're questioning my work?" Aaron shook his head. "Just curious." But curiosity wasn't the real reason. Aaron Blake had been investigating police corruption for nearly a year, and Rick Dalton's name had appeared in several suspicious reports. Back at the jail, Rachel Carter sat across from Marcus again. "Marcus," she said calmly, "you need to tell me exactly what happened." Marcus explained everything: the traffic stop, the search, the bag of drugs appearing from nowhere. Rachel listened without interrupting. When he finished, she closed the folder slowly. "You're telling the truth," she said. Marcus nodded. "Yes." Rachel stood. Good. Marcus looked confused. Good. Marcus looked confused. Good. Rachel smiled slightly. Because the truth is exactly what we need. The weeks that followed were tense. Marcus remained in jail awaiting trial. But Rachel and Detective Aaron Blake were working quietly behind the scenes. They began reviewing Dalton's past arrests. A disturbing pattern emerged. Nearly every suspect was black. Nearly every case relied on Dalton's testimony alone. And in several reports, body cam footage had mysteriously failed. Rachel spread the files across a conference table one night. There are 27 cases like Marcus's. Aaron shook his head. He's been doing this for years. Rachel tapped one report. But this time we're going to prove it. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later. A rookie officer named Jason Miller approached Detective Blake nervously. I think I have something, he said quietly. Jason explained that during Marcus's arrest, Dalton's cruiser dash camera had still been recording. Dalton had assumed it wasn't working, but Jason had found the footage archived in the system. Aaron watched the video late that night. His jaw tightened as the footage played. The camera clearly showed Dalton reaching into Marcus's truck and pulling the plastic bag from his own pocket, planting it. Aaron leaned back in his chair. Gotcha. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. Marcus sat beside Rachel Carter at the defense table. Across the room, Rick Dalton sat confidently beside the prosecutor. The judge called the court to order. Rachel stood, Your Honor. The defense would like to present video evidence. The courtroom lights dimmed. The dashcam footage appeared on the screen. The room went silent. Everyone watched as Dalton's hand moved into the truck. Everyone saw the small plastic bag appear from his pocket. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The video ended. The judge looked at Dalton with a hard expression. Officer Dalton, do you have an explanation? Dalton's face had gone pale. The prosecutor slowly closed his folder. Hours later, the verdict came. All charges against Marcus Carter were dismissed, but the trial wasn't over. Rick Dalton was immediately arrested for evidence tampering, false arrest, and corruption. As deputies placed handcuffs on him, Marcus watched quietly from the courtroom. The same man who had sent so many innocent people to jail was now walking toward a prison cell himself. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Marcus. How do you feel about the verdict? Marcus looked calm. I feel like justice finally worked. Months later, Rick Dalton stood before a judge for sentencing. The courtroom was filled with people whose lives he had damaged. The judge spoke firmly. A police officer's duty is to protect justice, not destroy it. Dalton was sentenced to several years in federal prison. Marcus walked out of the courthouse that day a free man. Beside him stood Rachel Carter and Detective Aaron Blake. Marcus looked up at the sky and took a long breath of fresh air. After months behind bars, freedom felt different. That because the man who had abused his power was finally paying the price. Marcus Carter stepped out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sunlight. For a moment he simply stood there on the stone steps, breathing slowly, as if he were relearning how freedom felt. Cars moved through the street, reporters spoke into cameras, and people gathered along the sidewalks whispering about the trial they had just witnessed. Only a few months earlier Marcus had been sitting alone in a jail cell wondering if anyone would believe him. Now everything had changed. Rachel Carter walked beside him holding a stack of legal folders. Detective Aaron Blake followed a few steps behind, watching the reporters crowd closer. A microphone pushed toward Marcus. Marcus, how does it feel to finally be free? Marcus looked at the reporter calmly. It feels like justice, he said quietly. Another reporter asked, Do you have anything to say to Officer Dalton after what happened? Marcus paused for a moment before answering. I hope he understands the damage he caused. Rachel placed a hand gently on Marcus's shoulder. Let's get out of here, she said. They walked down the courthouse steps and toward a quiet corner of the parking lot where the crowd couldn't hear them. Marcus turned to Aaron. I don't know how to thank you. Aaron shook his head. You don't have to. Marcus looked confused. You exposed him. Without you, I'd still be sitting in jail. Aaron leaned against his car. I didn't do it alone, he said. That rookie officer took a big risk bringing us the footage. Marcus nodded slowly. Still, you believed me. Aaron smiled faintly. When you investigate corruption long enough, you learn to recognize the truth. Rachel closed her folders and looked at Marcus. Your record will be completely cleared by the end of the week, she said. Marcus let out a deep breath. And that means I can finally go home. Rachel smiled. Yes. Marcus looked down at his hands for a moment. They took 5 months of my life. Rachel's voice softened. But they didn't take your future. Across the street, the courthouse doors opened again. Several officers escorted Rick Dalton outside in handcuffs. The same officer who had once walked through town with confidence now kept his eyes lowered as cameras flashed around him. Marcus watched silently. Dalton glanced up for a brief second, Their eyes met. There was no anger in Marcus's expression, only quiet resolve. Dalton quickly looked away as deputies guided him toward a police transport van. The door slammed shut. The van drove away. Marcus watched it disappear down the road. Aaron spoke quietly. Corruption always collapses, eventually. Marcus nodded. I just wish it hadn't taken so long. Aaron sighed. Systems move slowly. Rachel looked toward the courthouse. But they move. Later that evening, Marcus returned to the small neighborhood where he had grown up. The familiar streets looked the same, but something about the air felt lighter. As he walked toward his house, several neighbors stepped outside. An older woman named Mrs. Johnson waved from her porch. Marcus, we saw the news. Marcus smiled. Looks like you're finally home. Another neighbor approached and shook his hand. We knew you were innocent. Marcus thanked them quietly. When he finally reached his front door, he paused for a moment before opening it. Inside, his younger sister rushed forward and hugged him tightly. I can't believe you're really back. Marcus laughed softly. I told you I would be. She stepped back and wiped her eyes. Mom's been waiting all day. In the kitchen there, Mother stood quietly near the table. The moment she saw Marcus, she wrapped her arms around him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, she whispered softly, You're home. Marcus closed his eyes. Yes. Across town, Detective Aaron Blake sat at his desk in the police department, reviewing a new stack of reports. The Dalton case had triggered an internal investigation into several other suspicious arrests. Aaron flipped through the files slowly. Years of damage, but now those cases would be reopened. One by one, justice might have been delayed for many people, but it was finally catching up. Later that week, the courthouse held one final hearing related to the case. The judge addressed the courtroom with a serious tone. Officer Rick Dalton abused the authority entrusted to him. His actions undermined the integrity of law enforcement and harmed innocent citizens. The sentence was clear. Several years in federal prison. As Dalton was led away again, members of the community watched quietly. Some felt anger, others felt relief, but most felt something deeper: accountability. Outside the courthouse, Marcus stood beside Rachel and Aaron once more. Rachel handed him a final document. Your record is officially cleared. Marcus looked at the paper. All charges dismissed. Case expunged. He folded it carefully. Thank you. Aaron smiled slightly. What will you do now? Marcus thought for a moment. Going back to work. Rachel laughed softly. After everything that happened. Marcus nodded. Life doesn't stop. Aaron extended his hand. Well, if you ever decide to change careers, we could use honest people in law enforcement. Marcus shook his hand. I'll think about it. They shared a quiet laugh. As Marcus walked down the courthouse steps again, the sun was beginning to set across the city skyline. The past few months had tested his strength, patience, and faith in justice. But in the end, the truth had spoken louder than lies. And the officer who once abused his badge to destroy lives was now living with the consequences of his own actions. Marcus paused for a moment at the bottom of the steps and looked back at the courthouse building. Sometimes justice took time. Sometimes it took courage. But when the truth finally came to light, even the most powerful badge could not hide from it.